It's me again. I'm wearing the same clothes. Not because I didn't take a bath, but because we're doing this all in one day because of this whole video thing. So anyway, Laura watched the dancers again. Pa was playing the Irish washerwoman he called do-si ladies, do-si do, come down heavy on your heel and toe. Laura could not keep her feet still. Uncle George looked at her and laughed. Then he caught her by the hand and did a little dance with her in the corner. She liked Uncle George. Everybody was laughing over by the kitchen door. They were dragging Grandma in from the kitchen. Grandma's dress was beautiful as well, a dark blue calico with autumn-colored leaves scattered over it. Her cheeks were pink from laughing so hard, and she was shaking her head. No, I need to stay in the kitchen. I don't want to come out and dance. Wouldn't it be funny if you saw your grandma dancing? I know, it's funny. So, the wooden spoon was in her hand. I can't leave the syrup, she said. But Pa began to play the Arkansas Traveler, and everybody began to clap in time to the music. So Grandma bowed to them all and did a few steps by herself. She could dance as prettily as any of them. The clapping almost drowned the music of Pa's fiddle. Suddenly, Uncle George did a pigeon wing, and bowing low before Grandma, he began to do a jig. That's what they call dances. Grandma tossed her spoon to somebody. She put on her hands on her hips and faced Uncle George, and everybody shouted, "Grandma is jigging!" So Grandma started to do a jig. Laura clapped her hands in time to the music with all the other clapping hands. The fiddle sang as it had never sung before. Grandma's eyes were snapping as her cheeks were red, and underneath her skirt, her heels were clicking as fast as the thumping of Uncle George's boots. Everybody was excited. Uncle George kept on jigging. Grandma kept on facing him and jigging too. The fiddle did not stop. Uncle George began to breathe loudly, and he wiped the sweat off his forehead. Grandma's eyes just kept on twinkling. You can't beat her, George," somebody shouted. Uncle George jigged faster. He jigged twice as fast as he had been jigging. So did Grandma. Everybody cheered again. All the women were laughing and clapping their hands, and all the men were teasing George. George didn't care, but he didn't have the breath to laugh. He was jigging so hard. Pa's blue eyes were snapping and sparkling. He was standing up watching George and Grandma, and the bow danced over the fiddle strings. Laura jumped up and down and squealed and clapped her hands. It was so fun to watch Grandma and George do a dance-off. Grandma kept on jigging. Her hands were on her hips and her chin up high as she was smiling. George kept on jigging, but his boots did not thump as loudly as they had thumped at first because he was getting tired. Grandma's heels kept on clickety-clacketing happily. A drop of sweat dripped off George's forehead and shone on his cheek. All at once, he threw up both arms, gasped, and said, "Oh, I'm beat." He stopped jigging. Everybody made a terrific noise, shouting and yelling and stamping, cheering Grandma on. Grandma jigged just a little minute more. Her eyes sparkled just like Pa's when he laughed. George was laughing too and wiping his forehead on his sleeve. Suddenly, Grandma stopped laughing. She turned and ran as fast as she could in the kitchen. The fiddle had stopped playing. All the women were talking at once, and all the men teasing George that his mom had beat him in the jig. But everybody was still for a minute. When Grandma looked like that, she came to the door between the kitchen and the big room and said, "The syrup is waxing. Come and help yourself." Then everybody began to talk and laugh again. They all hurried to the kitchen for plates and outdoors to fill the plates with snow. The kitchen door was open and the cold air came in. Outdoors, the stars were frosty in the sky, and the air nipped Laura's cheeks and nose. Her breath was like smoke. Remember when I talked about when it's cold outside and you blow your breath and you can see it? It's like smoke. She and the other Laura, the cousin that she was fighting with, and all the other children scooped up clean snow with their plates. Then they went back into the crowded kitchen. Grandma stood by the brass kettle, and with the big wooden spoon, she poured hot syrup on each plate of snow. It cooled into a soft candy, and as fast as it cooled, they ate it. They could eat all they wanted, for maple sugar never hurt anybody, and plenty of snow outdoors to use. As soon as they ate one plate full, they filled their plates with snow again, and Grandma poured more syrup on it. I know you guys would love to eat all the candy you could eat, but it's not always the best for you. When they had eaten the soft maple candy until they could eat no more, then they helped themselves from the big long table loaded with pumpkin pies and dried berry pies and cookies and cakes. There was salt rising bread too, and cold boiled pork and pickles. Oh, how sour the pickles were. They all ate till they could hold no more, and they began to dance again. But Grandma watched the syrup in the kettle. Many times she took a little of it out into a saucer and stirred it round and round, and then shook her head and poured the syrup back into the kettle. The other room was loud and merry with the music of the fiddle and the noise of the dancing. At last, as Grandma stirred the syrup in the saucer, turned into little grains like sand. And Grandma called, "Quick, girls, it's graining!" Aunt Ruby and Aunt Dosha and Mom left the dance and came running. They set out pans, big pans and little pans, as fast as they could. Grandma filled them with syrup. They set out more. They filled ones away. They set the filled ones away to cool into maple sugar. Then Grandma said, "Now bring the patty pans for the children." There was a patty pan, or at least a broken cup or saucer, for every little girl and boy. They all watched anxiously while Grandma ladled out the syrup. Perhaps there would not be enough. Then somebody would have to be unselfish and polite. There was just enough syrup to go around. The last scrapings of the brass kettle exactly filled the very last patty pan for the last child. Nobody was left out. The fiddling and the dancing went on and on. Laura and the other Laura stood around and watched the dancers. Then they sat down on the floor in a corner and watched. The dance was so pretty and the music was so fun that Laura knew she could never get tired of it. All the beautiful skirts went swirling by, and the boots went stamping, and the fiddle kept on singing happily. Then Laura woke up, and she was lying across the foot of Grandma's bed. She was having so much fun that she fell dead asleep and didn't even know somebody moved her to the bed. In the morning, Ma and Grandma and baby Carrie were in bed. Pa and Grandpa were sleeping on rolled up blankets on the floor by the fireplace. Mary was nowhere in sight. She was sleeping with Aunt Dosha and Aunt Ruby in their bed. Soon everybody was getting up. There were pancakes and maple syrup for breakfast, and then Pa brought the horses and sled to the door. He helped Ma and Carrie get in, while Grandpa picked up Mary, and Uncle George picked up Laura, and they tossed them over the edge of the sled into the straw. Pa tucked in the robes around them, and Grandpa and Grandma and Uncle George stood calling, "Goodbye, goodbye," as they rode away into the big woods going home. The sun was warm, and the trotting horses threw up bits of muddy snow with their hooves. Behind the sled, Laura could see their footprints, and every footprint had gone through the thin snow into the mud. That means the snow is melting. So the next thing that comes is spring. Before night, Pa said, "We'll see the last of the sugar snow." So now you know why they're so excited to go and see their grandparents and have a dance at their house, because it was so fun. And if you didn't get to see any of your friends or family for such a long time or hardly ever, you would love these things too. So anyway, we're done with that chapter. The next chapter is called Going into Town. Remember, they didn't ever get to go into town. So it'll be their first time ever seeing a store.